Hi. Well, the next book in Proust is this one, Sodom and Gomorrah. And it is by just about 50 pages or so, the longest of the seven novels. And, okay, so it's got a pretty, uh, you know, explosive kind of title, if you want to call it that, Sodom and Gomorrah, also sometimes known as Cities on the Plain. And he is here dealing with themes of sexuality, particularly of homosexuality. And to an extent, this seems like a little bit of a change of direction, but in other respects, not really much at all. Because remember, in the previous novel, The Gramante's Way, Gramante's Way is actually the longest. This one is shorter than Gramante's Way by about 50 pages. Gramante's Way is the longest, and this is the second longest at about 515 pages. So I was wrong about that. But these are the two longest books, and both of them deal pretty extensively with sexuality in places. Um, you know, the Gramante's book and the one before it, um, In the Shadow of Young Girls in Flower, all of these books have dealt with the main character's kind of randiness. Essentially, what's problematic here is not that there is sex, and not that there is a some degree of casual sex, but there is this overriding thinking that everything all the time always is potentially sexual. There is this kind of overriding sexuality to everything that characters do. So in this book, you remember that Baron de Charlus, the uh, asshole, basically, from the previous book, turns out that he is gay. And the main character apparently discovered this prior to the end of the previous book, but delayed telling us about it till here. So, out of order, before he has a couple of final scenes in that book, he had seen, he had witnessed Charlot basically hit on and be accepted by Jupian, the servant of a neighbor, or something to that effect. In any case, they have sex. And the main character kind of sort of witnesses it. Now, my reading of it, he doesn't actually physically witness it, but he does hear it. And he's absolutely sure about what's going on, and it's absolutely explicit what's going on. But if you've read modern things published since like the 60s or 70s, and some of the raw sexual language there, it would almost be possible to miss that sex happens in a book from this era. And so it is clear that it's happening, but it's not like explicit, spelled out, blow by blow, in your face kind of thing. In fact, unless I've missed it, he doesn't really go into exactly what happens when two men engage in sex. He doesn't really even go that deep into what happens when a man and a woman have sex. And as we'll see, as this novel and the next novel continue, what happens when two women have sex is even more, it's straightforward a mystery to the author, to the character. Now, to the author, I mean, Proust was Proust. Who knows what he knew? But lesbianism is something that becomes an obsession in the next book. So, Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom, as we all know, in the Bible, some people have believed for many generations, for centuries, that Sodom refers to the sin of homosexuality between men, which means that Gomorrah becomes the word here for acts of sex between women. Now, what happens here is we find out that the Baron is gay. And then they go to this party And at this party, the Baron's sexuality just becomes, I guess now the thing is, the main character has been alerted to the fact that the character is in fact gay, and so now he is hypersensitive to everything the Baron does that makes him seem gay. And he calls him what's called an invert. At other places, he calls him a man-woman or a woman-man. And there are other places where a certain kind of uh, transposition of gender happens so that young men who the Baron is looking at are called girls and the Baron is called a woman and things of this nature. Okay, so that was partially the language of the time and partially kind of a psychological explanation that Proust is offering. Oh, by the way, I made a comment, I think in the last video, detailing Proust's debt to Freud. Apparently, now, I mean, we take what we read on the internet with a bit of a grain of salt. What we hear on the internet with a grain of salt, too, right? So, I don't really know. But supposedly, even though Freud and Proust were living at the same time and delving in a lot of the same areas, they did not read each other that anyone is aware of. So there is no explicit, straightforward quotation of Freud. And if I gave the impression that I felt that there was a straightforward quotation of Freud, then I was incorrect in that. What they're doing mostly is remember that the typical family, German family and Austrian family, that Freud had experience with psychoanalyzing and with himself living in and whatnot, that formed the basis for his understanding of his psychosexual development. And Proust in France had a very, very, very similar kind of European background as far as family is concerned. And so it makes sense that he would see some of the same psychosexual dynamics working. And I think it's entirely possible that in casual conversations at a coffee shop over beer or whatever it is that Proust did, at the kind of salons, perhaps, that he mocks in these novels, there were conversations about various psychological ideas in which some things of Freud's may have come up in an abstract way. But as far as like a deep analysis or deeper critique or agreement or exploration, no, definitely not. There's no evidence that the two authors were aware of each other or ever read each other. Okay, so that said, Proust uses this concept of inversion, and he also uses kind of this idea that you'll also find in some of Oscar Wilde's work about this about 20 years prior to Proust, of homosexual sex being unproductive because it cannot produce offspring, and so it cannot naturally reproduce. And that is kind of one of the things that Proust is getting at here, is that one generation of homosexuals cannot just produce another generation of homosexuals the way one generation of whatever animal can produce the next generation of animals. Okay, so one of his metaphors for this is the way a bee is useful or in pollinating flowers and carrying pollen from one flower to the next. Okay, so a similar kind of dry, if you will, or unproductive kind of sex act happens between two homosexuals and does not produce the next generation directly. The next generation of homosexuals is produced through roundabout means or other means. Okay, now, all of that, bear in mind, we have the Baron who is gay, and what happens is he is constantly talking to other men who also are inverts or who are also gay or perhaps bisexual. And this becomes sort of a sort of semi-understood scandal, kind of like all the people are kind of sort of in on it and laughing at the Baron, the old queen, the old woman kind of thing. And he thinks that nobody understands or knows, and he makes these somewhat weird, explicit comments, but other people know exactly what he's talking about, although they don't directly call him on it usually. And this happens throughout the entire novel and in the next one too, where the Baron is a relatively major player, along with his new love, or perhaps his new lover, Morel, who is a young violinist. Now, Morel seems to be a character who has a very dubious moral character. Nothing to do with sexuality here. He seems like he is strictly using the Baron for his own ends. And whether or not he's actually gay or just doing this for the support, because the Baron lavishes money and whatnot on him, and uses his own reputation to get Morel these well-known kind of performances, so he can become better known as a violinist and start making his way, etc., 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 etc. So, how much is Morel actually involved? It's hard to say. Is the relationship actually physical? It's hard to say. Because the Baron, as it turns out, is exactly like the main character. When the main character is looking at all these women in Albertine's group, so he's lusting after Albertine, he's lusting after he's lusting after Giselle, or whoever else is in that group. The Baron, the same thing over all young men, and he goes to the trouble of even like semi-grooming them in the sense of like, getting them used to being tickled or touched, or hey, let's hang out together and this kind of thing. And there's a certain kind of recruitment of the young that older gay people are directly accused of several times throughout the work, sometimes explicitly, sometimes just implied. Two old gay men talking about, oh yeah, that young guy, yeah, he's cute. Is he open? I don't know. Maybe he is. Maybe it. And just kind of, I don't know what to make of it. Because again, the thing here is, it's like everything is become completely sexualized with this narrator and with Proust. There's nothing that isn't like tinged with some kind of either straight, which is considered to be, totally normal, or gay, which is considered to be indecent and negative and a vice and those kinds of things. And I don't really know what to make of this exactly. The author, Proust himself, apparently was gay, although nobody seems to have knocked down absolute evidence that he ever physically engaged in anything. But apparently we do know that he had great interest, and he was never married, had never had kids, never associated with a woman in that kind of way. So that seems to indicate that he was very much a gay man, but his depiction of homosexuality in this book from a perhaps beautifully straight character is anything but straightforward. And speaking of the main character, he becomes increasingly obsessive and possessive of Albertine, and he particularly becomes obsessed with her possibility of enjoying lesbian liaisons. And his approach to this is, rather than trying to, be the kind of person who Albertine might want to stay with because she loves him and because the relationship is fulfilling, he basically tries to control her actions. And this will lead directly into the next book, which is called The Prisoner. And the prisoner is straightforwardly Albertine, although there's a way in which Marcel is also the prisoner in a sort of Hegelian master-slave dialectic, which is one of the things we're trying to look at in that book. But anyway, in Sodom and Gomorrah, we have the situation of all kinds of discourse, all kinds of conversation in the salons he's been going to, sort of slowly morphing into not just sexual conversation, but homosexual conversation. And many of the characters seeming to have a sort of hidden homosexual side. How far this goes, how many characters are involved, is a good question. But it definitely seems to pervade the culture. Okay, so I may come back to Sodom and Gomorrah sometime this week. I'm not sure. But in any case, this is my take for now. Have a good night, and I will see you next time.